I'm Jude Thomas, 42 years old, and I serve as the Senior IT Systems Architect at Stratton Technologies. For the past 15 years, I've been responsible for overseeing and maintaining the core IT infrastructure that supports over $85 million in annual revenue. My role is critical, not just because of the scale of operations, but because the systems I manage are the backbone of Stratton's entire business. Every piece of hardware, every line of code, every access protocol has passed through my hands or my direct supervision. This isn't a job where you can afford mistakes. Precision and airtight documentation are not just professional habits to me, they're survival tools. On this particular day, I had just returned from a scheduled vendor meeting. The discussion was technical, focused on system upgrades and vendor compliance with our cybersecurity standards. By the time I got back to my office, something felt off. The silence in the hallways was unusual, and as I approached my workspace, I noticed two corporate compliance officers already inside, rifling through my filing cabinets and desk drawers. Their movements were deliberate but methodical, as if they were following a checklist. There was no prior warning or invitation. They looked up as I entered. "We're here on an anonymous tip," one of them said, voice steady but devoid of any unnecessary explanation. "We need to conduct a thorough search of your office and your work materials." I nodded slowly, my face neutral. Inside, I was anything but surprised. The gears in my mind shifted immediately into strategic mode. I knew exactly who was behind this. Martin Reynolds, our new operations manager, who also happens to be the CEO's nephew, had orchestrated this. The timing, the nature of the allegations hinted at behind the anonymous tip. It all pointed to a calculated setup. Martin's ambition was no secret, and I'd recently noted subtle shifts in his behavior and increased interest in my projects. But panic was not an option. In situations like this, maintaining composure is critical. I understood the power dynamic here. All eyes on me, the target of a sudden investigation. Losing my cool would only give them an advantage, so I stayed calm, measured. "Go ahead," I said in a controlled tone. "Feel free to look through everything." My acceptance was strategic. I wanted them to know I had nothing to hide, and that I was confident in my professional integrity. As they sifted through my meticulously organized files, I kept track mentally of what they were examining. I had maintained detailed logs, system diagrams, and email trails that would unequivocally prove my adherence to company protocols. Every project milestone, every vendor interaction, every equipment upgrade was documented and backed up on secure servers. The compliance officers might have suspected wrongdoing, but I knew those suspicions would crumble under scrutiny. While the search was ongoing, I allowed myself a moment of internal reflection. This was not just an attack on my role. It was an attempt to destabilize the technical foundation of Stratton Technologies by removing the person who had safeguarded it for a decade and a half. It was a power play, thinly veiled as due diligence. I recognized that the anonymous tip was likely fabricated to initiate a formal investigation, buying Martin time to manipulate systems from behind the scenes. Yet, I was prepared. Years of disciplined record-keeping and a solid understanding of contractual protections meant I was not defenseless. My employment contract included strict confidentiality clauses and whistleblower protections, and I personally ensured that all system access logs were immutable and auditable. As they continued their search, I silently planned my next moves: how to gather all relevant evidence methodically, how to protect not only my position, but also the integrity of the company's IT systems. The stakes were high, but so was my resolve. I remained outwardly calm, knowing that every reaction, every word, and every document I could produce would count in the battle ahead. That moment, their unexpected presence in my office, marked the beginning of a carefully constructed professional confrontation. But I was ready. In the corporate arena, where politics and power plays often masquerade as procedural investigations, steadfast professionalism and thorough preparation are the keys to survival. I had both in abundance. Over the course of my 15-year tenure at Stratton Technologies, I have been deeply involved in architecting and sustaining the company's IT backbone, the very infrastructure underpinning operations that generate over $85 million annually. When I reflect on the scope and scale of my contributions, I focus not just on the technical achievements, but on the systematic, measurable impact these improvements have had on the company's bottom line. and operational resilience. From early on, I identified that one of the primary risks to our operational efficiency was system downtime, which directly translated into lost productivity and revenue. Through a series of targeted initiatives, I spearheaded the redesign and modernization of our core network architecture. This involved implementing advanced redundancy protocols, refining failover systems, and enforcing stricter access controls, all aimed at minimizing vulnerabilities and ensuring rapid recovery from potential disruptions. The results were significant. We managed to reduce system downtime by approximately 40% within the first 5 years after the redesign, translating into annual savings exceeding $6 million. Those figures aren't arbitrary. They come from rigorous post-incident analyses and financial audits that I regularly commissioned and reviewed. By quantifying these improvements, I was able to make a compelling case to senior leadership for continued investment in IT infrastructure, balancing cost control with strategic growth. Certifications and continuous professional development have been critical in maintaining my effectiveness. Over the years, I have accumulated multiple industry-recognized credentials, including Certified Information Systems Security Professional, CISSP, Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, and Project Management Professional, PMP. These certifications aren't just ornamental. They reflect a disciplined approach to both security and project execution that aligns with Stratton's compliance and governance mandates. Leading cross-departmental projects has also been central to my role. IT doesn't exist in a vacuum. Collaboration with compliance, legal, finance, and operations teams ensures that our systems not only meet technical specifications, but also comply with evolving regulatory requirements. For example, I headed the initiative to align our cybersecurity framework with the latest NIST standards, a project that involved coordinating inputs from multiple stakeholders, consolidating technical documentation, and delivering training sessions across departments. This effort was instrumental in preparing Stratton for external audits and regulatory reviews. My work is meticulously documented. Every project phase, from initial design through implementation and testing to final deployment, has associated documentation stored in secure repositories. These include system architecture diagrams, change management logs, vendor contracts, and compliance checklists. This documentation serves multiple purposes. It protects the company legally, supports operational continuity by enabling rapid knowledge transfer, and safeguards my professional accountability by creating a transparent audit trail. One particular aspect of my professional portfolio that underscores my value and leverage within the company is the 5-year vesting schedule tied to my stock options, valued at approximately $118,000. This is not just a financial incentive. It is a binding contractual commitment, reflecting the company's recognition of the strategic importance of my role and contributions. The vesting timeline also incentivizes long-term performance and retention, elements that opportunistic actors like Martin Reynolds tend to overlook or underestimate. Furthermore, my role includes oversight of sensitive contractual obligations with third-party vendors and internal teams. These contracts cover service-level agreements, SLAs, data privacy commitments, and cybersecurity warranties. Each contract is accompanied by a comprehensive log of interactions and compliance verifications that I personally review and update. This level of diligence has prevented potential exposure to legal and financial risk, establishing my reputation as a meticulous and reliable custodian of Stratton's IT integrity. This depth of involvement and the breadth of responsibilities mean that I am not easily replaceable. My knowledge isn't limited to technical schematics. It extends into corporate governance, risk management, and regulatory compliance. Any attempt to displace me or disrupt my work would require navigating a complex web of contractual protections, documented processes, and stakeholder relationships that I have carefully cultivated. This comprehensive professional background is precisely why the anonymous tip that triggered the investigation seemed so out of place. The allegations themselves were vague and unfounded, lacking any technical grounding or credible evidence. I had always anticipated that my well-documented track record and the extensive audit trails I maintained would be my strongest defense against any fabricated claims. But beyond defense, my documentation and certifications were also strategic assets, tools to demonstrate not only compliance, but proactive leadership in safeguarding Stratton's IT environment. In meetings with internal compliance teams before the investigation, I had routinely presented detailed reports on system performance metrics, audit results, and project updates. These reports, some spanning hundreds of pages, were archived systematically, indexed by date, project, and relevance. This level of organization was not common practice across other departments, but it was essential in IT due to the criticality of the systems involved and the regulatory scrutiny we faced. In sum, my value to Stratton Technologies extends far beyond technical expertise. It is embedded in a culture of precision, accountability, and strategic foresight. These qualities have allowed me to build a professional fortress, not just of skills but of documented evidence and contractual leverage that underpins my position and protects against opportunistic attempts to undermine it. It's a foundation that any competent professional in my field should strive to construct, especially in environments susceptible to internal politics and power plays. So as the compliance officers conducted their unexpected search, rifling through files that I had ordered and cross-referenced meticulously, I remained confident. The mountain of documented evidence I had assembled over the years was not only a testament to my professionalism, but an unassailable shield against the baseless accusations that were about to unfold. Martin Reynolds, now 34, had recently been promoted to operations manager, a title that gave him significant influence within Stratton Technologies, but not nearly the depth of technical knowledge or operational expertise that my role demands. His connection to the CEO as a nephew afforded him an accelerated career path, a fact well known among the executive team and middle management alike. Yet, despite his privileged position, his ambition was palpable, often crossing into recklessness. I had observed subtle shifts in his behavior over the prior months, a growing impatience with established protocols, a hunger to claim credit for initiatives he neither conceived nor understood, and increasingly aggressive attempts to sideline those who stood in his way, myself included. Facing mounting pressure from upper management to reduce operational costs by at least 12%, Martin saw an opportunity. By targeting me, the senior IT systems architect, he aimed to eliminate a key obstacle. My role, critical and highly specialized, naturally shielded me from casual replacement. But by fabricating allegations of data mishandling and conflict of interest, he sought to provoke a formal investigation that could justify my removal. It was a calculated gambit. Undermine my professional integrity before undermining the systems I managed, thus positioning himself as the indispensable problem solver. What Martin fundamentally underestimated was the comprehensive nature of my access logs and contractual protections. Every login, every system change, every data transfer within Stratton's IT environment was recorded in immutable audit trails. These logs were not merely technical artifacts, they were legally recognized records that could not be altered without detection. Furthermore, my employment contract contained strict confidentiality clauses and whistleblower protections designed specifically to forestall unfounded accusations and retaliatory actions. Crucially, it also included a non-compete clause and severance provisions that would severely constrain any attempt by Martin to replace me without triggering costly legal ramifications for the company. Martin was blind to these structural safeguards. His overconfidence and lack of technical insight made him assume that the compliance officers would accept his allegations at face value. He seemed unaware that Karen Blake, the compliance officer assigned to lead the investigation, was not a willing participant in this scheme, but rather a procedural enforcer caught in the middle. Karen's commitment to due process made her hesitant to take Martin's word as gospel without evidence, but her loyalty to the company hierarchy initially made her vulnerable to manipulation. She was following protocol, unaware that the anonymous tip was a deliberate fabrication crafted by Martin to orchestrate my professional downfall. This miscalculation was Martin's critical oversight. He failed to appreciate that my role was not just technical execution, but also involved a deep understanding of corporate governance and compliance protocols. My documentation spanned every relevant domain: contractual terms, system architecture, operational logs, and internal communications. Each element of my work was cross-referenced and verified regularly, creating a tightly woven professional fabric that could not be unraveled by hearsay or fabricated claims. From a strategic perspective, Martin's attempt to fabricate a data mishandling accusation was inherently flawed. Stratton's compliance framework required that any such claim be accompanied by verifiable evidence, something Martin could not provide. His pressure tactics overlooked the fact that I had previously reported irregularities in budget allocations and unauthorized operational directives linked to his department. Ironically, while he was accusing me, it was his own conduct that was opening regulatory vulnerabilities for the company. In the weeks leading up to the anonymous tip, I had noticed unusual discrepancies in the allocation of $350,000 earmarked for IT upgrades. Financial audits, which I had access to as part of cross-departmental project oversight, revealed attempts by Martin to redirect these funds toward projects under his direct supervision, projects that had little to do with IT infrastructure or compliance. This diversion not only violated internal budget policies, but also exposed the company to potential regulatory scrutiny, particularly given the stringent reporting requirements tied to our contracts with federal agencies. Despite this, Martin's hubris led him to believe he could outmaneuver me by weaponizing the compliance department, but his lack of technical acumen and disregard for procedural rigor were glaring weaknesses. He did not anticipate that compliance officers, while initially unaware of the manipulation, would soon uncover inconsistencies as they delved into the investigation. His failure to anticipate the technical evidence I had amassed meant that his plan was inherently brittle, destined to crumble once the facts were examined systematically. Karen Blake, caught between her duty to the company and the pressure from above, was pivotal in this unfolding scenario. Her initial neutrality meant she was open to reviewing all evidence impartially, but Martin's influence threatened to sway her judgment. This put her in a difficult position, professionally obligated to investigate thoroughly, yet vulnerable to internal politics. I recognized that winning over Karen's impartiality would be critical in exposing the truth and dismantling Martin's fabricated narrative. In summary, Martin Reynolds' attempt to usurp my role through a fabricated anonymous tip was driven by ambition and short-sightedness. His strategy ignored the protective frameworks built into my employment contract and the meticulous documentation I maintained. His underestimation of compliance protocols and audit mechanisms left his plan vulnerable to systematic dismantling. As I watched his scheme unfold, I focused on leveraging his oversight against him, knowing that with patience and comprehensive evidence, the facade would collapse and his duplicity would be exposed. After the initial shock of discovering the compliance officers rifling through my office, my priority shifted immediately to gathering and assessing the information related to the investigation. Once I was able to access the compliance report and internal emails that had circulated regarding the anonymous tip, I began a methodical review to verify the validity of the allegations. The core accusation revolved around alleged data mishandling and a supposed conflict of interest, serious charges that, if substantiated, could have jeopardized my career and the company's IT integrity. But as I systematically cross-referenced each claim against the digital evidence I controlled, it became clear that the tip was a fabrication and that Martin Reynolds was at the center of this orchestrated scheme. First, I scrutinized the system access logs, which recorded every interaction with Stratton's IT infrastructure. These logs were immutable and time-stamped, stored in secure, tamper-evident repositories I had established years ago precisely to prevent unauthorized alterations. Contrary to the allegation of data mishandling, the logs showed no unauthorized data transfers, no unusual login patterns, and no signs of access outside my designated scope. Every administrative action attributed to me was accounted for, with corresponding approval workflows and change management tickets attached. Next, I dove into the financial audits and budget tracking reports related to IT expenditures. Here, I found discrepancies that aligned alarmingly with the timing of the anonymous tip. The $350,000 earmarked for IT upgrades, critical investments that had been approved by the board and compliance committees, had been quietly reallocated without proper authorization. The trail led directly to Martin's office. Internal emails revealed that he had instructed members of his team to divert funds toward operational projects, unrelated to IT infrastructure enhancement, projects that conveniently elevated his profile, but contravened established budgetary controls. With these findings, I shifted focus to the compliance policies and employment contracts. I reviewed the clauses surrounding conflict of interest, data governance, and reporting obligations. The policies mandated strict adherence to budgetary approval processes and required immediate disclosure of any potential conflicts, standards I had consistently met and documented. Contrasting this with Martin's unilateral budget reallocations and covert instructions revealed a clear breach of both corporate governance and regulatory obligations. Additionally, I examined internal email chains exchanged over the past quarter. Despite Martin's attempt to obscure his involvement, the written correspondence betrayed his direct engagement. He corresponded with compliance officers, including Karen Blake, framing the narrative around concerns about my management of sensitive data and hinting at supposed irregularities. These emails lacked substantive evidence, but were framed to trigger suspicion and prompt an investigation. Throughout this review, a pattern emerged. Martin was weaponizing the compliance framework to mask his misdeeds and remove me from my position. His failure to anticipate my comprehensive documentation was his critical error. Every claim he made was contradicted by verifiable records. I realized that while the investigation was ostensibly targeting me, it was actually exposing vulnerabilities in Martin's own conduct. Moreover, the compliance officers, following protocol but lacking full context, had become instruments of his agenda without realizing it. I documented my findings meticulously, compiling a cross-reference dossier linking access logs, financial records, email correspondence, and corporate policies. This dossier not only disproved the allegations against me, but also highlighted Martin's violations and procedural lapses within the compliance team. I prepared annotations that detailed the sequence of events, pinpointed discrepancies, and identified regulatory breaches. At this stage, my internal calculations shifted from defensive to strategic. I recognized that simply disproving the false claims would not be enough. I needed to leverage this evidence to expose the root cause of the investigation and hold those responsible accountable. But timing and precision were crucial. I had to ensure all information was securely backed up, legally sound, and aligned with company policies before proceeding. Any premature disclosure could trigger retaliation or procedural pushback. In parallel, I started drafting a professional communication plan to engage with legal counsel and trusted executives without alerting Martin. I knew that Karen Blake's role was pivotal. She was caught between her procedural duty and loyalty to the leadership. Presenting her with incontrovertible evidence would be essential for disrupting Martin's influence over the investigation. As I concluded this phase of assessment, I remained outwardly composed. The anonymous tip was a weak thread, but it had already set a chain reaction in motion within the company. The challenge now was to convert these initial discoveries into a systematic, professional response that would dismantle the false narrative and protect Stratton's IT infrastructure. My next moves needed to be deliberate, methodical, and supported by the concrete facts I had uncovered. The game was no longer about defense. It was about reclaiming control. After solidifying my understanding of the false allegations and identifying Martin's manipulation, the next step was to bring in legal expertise to navigate the complex corporate and regulatory environment. I immediately contacted my employment attorney, David Larson. David was a seasoned corporate lawyer with a background in employment law and extensive experience handling whistleblower protections and internal investigations. I briefed him thoroughly, providing an overview of the situation and my preliminary evidence. His calm, analytical approach matched mine, and I knew that partnering with someone who understood both the technical and legal nuances would be critical. The moment I connected with David, I emphasized the importance of organizing every piece of documentation chronologically and contextually. We agreed that the foundation of a strong defense and eventual counteraction would be a meticulously assembled, comprehensive dossier. I began the methodical process of compiling all relevant materials: emails, system access logs, meeting minutes, compliance reports, and contractual documents. Each category required careful extraction and verification. Starting with emails, I focused on correspondence that involved IT project directives, budget approvals, and internal communication with management and compliance teams. I pulled every message that referenced my work or contained directives relevant to the investigation's allegations. These emails were sorted by date and sender, highlighting threads where Martin's involvement was evident, particularly his instructions to reallocate funds and his communications with compliance officers, casting suspicion on my role. Next, I gathered detailed system access logs from the secure audit trails embedded within our IT infrastructure. These logs, stored in tamper-proof environments, recorded every login attempt, configuration change, and data transfer associated with my accounts. Extracting these logs into readable, time-stamped formats allowed us to cross-reference specific allegations with verifiable activity records. Notably, the logs consistently showed compliance with approved protocols and no unauthorized data handling. Meeting minutes and compliance reports were equally crucial. I accessed records from project steering committees, budget meetings, and compliance audits, where IT infrastructure and expenditures were discussed. These documents provided contextual support to my claims, demonstrating my transparency and adherence to governance standards. They also revealed inconsistencies in Martin's explanations regarding budget shifts and project justifications. Contractual documentation presented another layer of protection. I reviewed my employment contract, focusing on clauses related to confidentiality, whistleblower protections, non-compete agreements, and severance terms. These provisions were designed to safeguard me from unjust dismissal or retaliation, especially in scenarios involving internal investigations lacking substantive evidence. I also included copies of vendor contracts and service-level agreements that I oversaw, which further reinforced my position as a linchpin within the company's operational framework. To ensure the integrity of this extensive dossier, I utilized encrypted storage solutions and created redundant backups on secure servers external to Stratton's network. This precaution was vital to prevent any tampering or loss of critical evidence. Furthermore, I reached out discreetly to a handful of trusted colleagues who had witnessed some of Martin's questionable directives and could provide corroborating statements if necessary. Their voluntary insights added another dimension of credibility to the case. Throughout this organizational phase, I maintained a detailed audit trail of my activities, recording dates, times, and methods used to collect and compile the information. This meta-documentation would later serve to verify the authenticity and chain of custody for every piece of evidence presented. It was imperative that no aspect of my preparation left room for challenge or doubt. On a strategic level, I constantly evaluated the vulnerabilities Martin might have overlooked. His ignorance of the non-compete clause tied to a substantial severance package meant any attempt to replace me could expose the company to costly legal ramifications. Additionally, the regulatory reporting deadlines related to budget changes and operational compliance were fast approaching, deadlines that Martin had neglected. These factors represented pressure points I could leverage in negotiations or formal complaints. By the end of this phase, the volume of organized documentation was substantial, an airtight chronological narrative that not only refuted the anonymous tip's allegations, but exposed the underlying misconduct. My calculated, methodical approach ensured that I retained control over the unfolding situation, transforming a potentially career-threatening attack into a strategic opportunity. This meticulous preparation laid the groundwork for the next steps: formal legal action and professional engagement with Stratton's board and compliance leadership. I was no longer merely defending my reputation. I was assembling the evidence to hold the true culprit accountable and restore integrity to the company's governance. The groundwork was complete. Now it was time to execute the plan with precision. Once my attorney, David Larson, had reviewed the extensive dossier I compiled, his assessment was unequivocal. He confirmed several critical contract violations that would form the backbone of our legal strategy. First and foremost was the wrongful investigation itself. The company initiated a formal compliance inquiry without any substantive cause or credible evidence. This constituted a breach of procedural fairness under both our internal policies and applicable employment law. David explained that such an investigation must be predicated on concrete, verifiable allegations, supported by a preliminary fact-finding process, which was entirely absent in my case. Instead, the anonymous tip served as a pretext, orchestrated by Martin Reynolds, to manufacture grounds for disciplinary action. More importantly, David identified a clear breach of fiduciary duty on Martin's part. As operations manager, and especially given his close relationship to the CEO, Martin owed the company and its shareholders a duty of good faith and honest dealing. Orchestrating a false accusation against a key employee for personal gain fell squarely into misconduct that could be actionable both internally and in civil court. The legal implications went beyond workplace impropriety. They touched on potential fraud and abuse of power. David emphasized that the evidence, particularly the email chains ordering unauthorized budget reallocations and attempts to circumvent compliance protocols, demonstrated Martin's deliberate attempts to undermine both corporate governance and my professional standing. In parallel, we scrutinized the compliance team's handling of the investigation, led by Karen Blake. While Karen appeared to be acting in good faith, procedural lapses were evident. The investigation lacked initial due diligence. No attempt was made to corroborate the anonymous tip before launching a full office search and audit. Nor were the standard notification and rights advisories provided to me in a timely manner, which contravened our company's internal investigation procedures and regulatory guidelines. David pointed out that these procedural errors diminished the investigation's legitimacy and exposed the company to liability for violating employee rights. On the technical front, I supplied David with detailed system architecture diagrams that visually mapped out the IT infrastructure elements under my stewardship. These diagrams demonstrated the complexity and sensitivity of the systems and underscored why any unauthorized changes, such as those instigated by Martin without consultation, constituted serious operational risks. We cross-referenced these diagrams with documented change management logs, all of which showed that I followed approved protocols meticulously. This evidence was crucial to refute any suggestion that I engaged in negligent or unauthorized activity. The unauthorized budgeting decisions Martin enforced raised regulatory red flags as well. Our financial documentation revealed that $350,000 earmarked for critical IT infrastructure improvements was diverted to operational projects outside the approved scope. This misallocation violated not only internal financial controls, but also compliance requirements tied to federal contracts the company held. David highlighted that such violations could trigger penalties from oversight agencies and constituted grounds for whistleblower complaints. Our plan included filing formal reports with regulatory bodies to ensure independent scrutiny. David and I meticulously prepared a formal complaint to present to the Stratton Board of Directors. The complaint summarized the contract breaches, highlighted procedural deficiencies in the investigation, documented Martin's fiduciary misconduct, and outlined the risk exposures resulting from his actions. We framed the complaint to emphasize legal liability, financial consequences, and reputational risks, factors that would compel the board to act decisively. Additionally, we drafted a whistleblower report to be submitted confidentially to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, detailing the budget irregularities and governance failures. Throughout this process, we cross-verified every piece of evidence to avoid any gaps that Martin's legal counsel could exploit. The email correspondences from Martin, explicitly instructing budget reallocations and framing me as a security risk, were particularly damning. Compliance memos flagged inconsistencies in their investigation process, and the system logs incontrovertibly proved my adherence to protocol. This layered approach ensured that our legal position was robust and multidimensional, combining contractual, regulatory, and procedural arguments. David also advised on communication strategy to maintain a professional demeanor and avoid any statements that could be construed as retaliatory or defamatory. We agreed I would maintain all correspondence in writing and direct any inquiries to legal counsel. This disciplined approach would not only protect me legally, but also reinforce my credibility in the eyes of company leadership and external regulators. In summary, David's expert confirmation of multiple contract violations breach of fiduciary duty by Martin, and procedural lapses within the compliance team transformed my gathered evidence into a formidable legal case. The groundwork was laid for a systematic escalation, leveraging corporate governance mechanisms, legal protections, and regulatory oversight to hold Martin accountable and safeguard my career. With the foundation of this airtight case, the next phase would be to deploy these legal tools strategically to force corporate reckoning. Serving the legal notices was a pivotal moment where preparation met execution. With David Larson's guidance, I drafted comprehensive letters addressed to Stratton Technologies' Human Resources Department and the Board of Directors. Each document outlined the sequence of events with clinical precision, detailing Martin Reynolds' misconduct, including his deliberate diversion of budget funds, breach of fiduciary duties, and the orchestration of the anonymous tip that triggered the unwarranted investigation into my office. The notices also highlighted procedural lapses by the compliance team, pointing out deviations from established protocols, such as the lack of preliminary evidence corroboration before conducting office searches, and failure to provide timely notification of investigation rights. The language was formal and meticulously documented. Every assertion referenced specific evidence, emails, audit trails, contractual clauses, to ensure that there was no room for ambiguity or dismissal. The notices were delivered via certified mail and electronically to ensure receipt and a verifiable chain of custody. I maintained copies of all transmittal receipts and logged timestamps of delivery confirmations. This attention to procedural rigor was not merely bureaucratic, it was a strategic choice. Establishing a documented timeline of these communications would be crucial in any legal or regulatory proceedings, demonstrating that I engaged the company through proper channels before escalating the matter externally. Simultaneously, I initiated confidential outreach to key clients who depended heavily on the IT systems I managed. Instead of framing the communication as a complaint or accusation, I focused on transparency and risk mitigation. I alerted client IT directors and project leads to emerging system instabilities linked to unauthorized operational changes, emphasizing potential impacts on service continuity and compliance with their contractual SLAs. I carefully balanced the information disclosed, enough to prompt vigilance and concern, but without breaching confidentiality agreements or triggering unwarranted alarm. The objective was twofold: to protect client interests and to indirectly pressure Stratton's leadership by highlighting the tangible risks caused by Martin's mismanagement. These client contacts were documented by secure email threads, with acknowledgements and follow-up inquiries recorded meticulously. At the same time, I discreetly secured a consulting agreement with a competitor firm. This move was calculated to ensure financial security independent of Stratton's internal turmoil. The contract was structured to avoid conflicts of interest and complied fully with the non-compete clause in my employment agreement, which I had reviewed extensively with David. By having this contingency plan in place, I reduced my exposure to potential retaliation or sudden termination. The consulting contract was stored under encrypted files, accessible only to me and my attorney, serving as a safeguard should the dispute escalate to a point where my position at Stratton became untenable. Throughout this phase, I maintained a strict professionalism in all correspondence and interactions. Despite the pressure and the underlying tension, I avoided emotional reactions or confrontational language. Every email, memo, and verbal exchange was framed with measured formality and an emphasis on facts. This approach reinforced my credibility and ensured that my conduct could withstand scrutiny not only internally, but also in any legal or regulatory forum. Parallel to these external steps, I continued to audit and back up all critical IT systems under my responsibility. Knowing that Martin's unauthorized changes had begun to destabilize operations, I prioritized creating secure snapshots of system configurations, access controls, and data integrity logs. These backups were encrypted and stored off-site, with access restricted and tracked through multi-factor authentication. This technical safeguard protected the company's core infrastructure from further damage and preserved the integrity of the evidence trail. It also positioned me as a responsible steward of the company's IT assets, contrasting sharply with Martin's reckless interventions. The cumulative effect of these strategic moves was subtle, but significant. Martin remained unaware of the formal legal notices and client alerts, continuing his activities under the false impression that the matter was contained. Compliance officers, meanwhile, started to question their own procedures as unexplained irregularities surfaced in their audit findings, signs that the investigation was far from straightforward. Within the company, whispers of concern began to circulate, though no formal acknowledgement was yet made. By aligning legal action, client communication, and technical safeguards, I was effectively closing a professional noose around Martin's scheme. Each step was designed to escalate pressure incrementally while maintaining my own position of strength and control. The atmosphere was charged but contained, like a carefully loaded spring ready for release, with the next phases of the plan poised to exploit the vulnerabilities I had uncovered. System failures began to surface almost immediately after Martin's unauthorized changes took hold. The IT infrastructure I had meticulously designed and maintained was not just a collection of hardware and software. It was a complex, interdependent ecosystem built on precise configurations, carefully controlled access, and coordinated workflows. When Martin, with neither the depth of technical knowledge nor the procedural rigor required, authorized modifications to critical system elements, the effects rippled quickly and with increasing severity. Within days, we saw a noticeable uptick in system errors and network latency. Routine processes that had once executed flawlessly were now faltering. Redundancy measures I had put in place to ensure high availability were compromised by unauthorized alterations to failover protocols. Critical back-end services intermittently crashed or became unreachable during peak operational hours. These failures were not random glitches. They were symptomatic of deliberate, ill-informed tampering with system configurations. I monitored these developments closely through the centralized Network Operations Center dashboards and system health logs, which I had continuous access to. The logs showed frequent unauthorized attempts to change firewall rules, adjustments to load balancers, and modifications to database replication settings, all without the proper change management tickets or peer reviews that our governance policies mandated. These unauthorized changes directly contradicted the company's documented IT controls and risk management procedures. As the technical issues escalated, key clients, many relying on Stratton's systems for mission-critical operations, began to voice concerns. I received discreet communications from several client IT directors, raising alarms about intermittent service disruptions and degraded system performance impacting their workflows. While I maintained confidentiality and professionalism in these exchanges, I understood that client dissatisfaction could quickly translate into contractual disputes and damage to Stratton's reputation. These client concerns also caught the attention of regulatory bodies responsible for overseeing compliance with service-level agreements and data protection standards. Given the sensitive nature of some client data and the contractual obligations tied to uptime and security, any breach or instability could trigger formal investigations and penalties under corporate governance regulations. The convergence of technical instability and regulatory scrutiny placed Stratton in a precarious position, one exacerbated by Martin's reckless interventions. Meanwhile, Martin's communications to me became increasingly erratic and desperate. He reached out multiple times, often outside normal business hours, requesting assistance to resolve technical problems he had inadvertently caused. Each interaction was carefully documented. Emails, instant messages, and call logs were archived with timestamps. I responded with professionalism, but firmly redirected him to legal counsel, explicitly stating that I was not authorized to engage in operational support under these contentious circumstances. By maintaining this boundary, I preserved the integrity of my position and ensured all communications could serve as evidence if needed. Inside the compliance department, the initial investigation led by Karen Blake began to reveal procedural inconsistencies. As auditors delved deeper into the chain of custody for the anonymous tip and examined the evidence supporting the investigation, questions arose about the validity of the source and the thoroughness of the initial fact-finding. Discrepancies in the timing of document requests, lack of independent corroboration, and failure to follow established notification protocols undermined the compliance team's confidence in the investigation's foundation. Internal audit reports started flagging irregularities linked to directives originating from Martin's office, directives that contradicted established financial controls and compliance mandates. These findings prompted Karen and her team to reconsider their stance, recognizing that their role as impartial investigators was being compromised by manipulated information. The unfolding realization that Martin had exploited their procedural role to mask his misconduct created a professional dilemma, but it also presented an opportunity. By the end of this period, the situation at Stratton was deteriorating on multiple fronts. Systems destabilized, client trust wavered, regulatory attention intensified, and internal compliance officers questioned their own processes. Yet, amid the turbulence, I maintained a composed and methodical approach. Every system failure, client communication, regulatory notice, and compliance audit finding was logged, time-stamped, and correlated with the unauthorized changes. This comprehensive real-time documentation created an irrefutable trail that connected Martin directly to the operational disruptions and compliance breaches. Strategically, I leveraged this accumulating evidence to prepare for the next phase of the confrontation. The technical data underscored not only my innocence, but also highlighted Martin's incompetence and the risks his actions posed to the company. I continued to fortify the backup systems I controlled, ensuring that critical data and system configurations were secured against further unauthorized tampering. I also reinforced communications with trusted colleagues who were beginning to share concerns, carefully cultivating a network of professional witnesses to corroborate the emerging narrative. In essence, while Martin's actions threatened to destabilize Stratton, they simultaneously accelerated the exposure of his misconduct. The mounting system failures and regulatory attention created pressure points that would soon force corporate leadership to confront the deeper issues. My role shifted from passive target to active strategist, using every documented failure and procedural lapse as leverage in a meticulously planned professional response. The situation was volatile, the stakes were high, and the battle lines were drawn. Simultaneously, as I continued reinforcing my defenses and documenting every anomaly, Stratton's board of directors initiated a formal investigation into the allegations and the operational disruptions that had escalated under Martin Reynolds' management. This was not just a routine internal review, it was a critical escalation prompted by the comprehensive whistleblower report David and I had prepared and submitted confidentially to the SEC. The report detailed the unauthorized budget reallocations, procedural failures by the compliance team, and the fabricated anonymous tip that had triggered the investigation into my office. The involvement of the SEC meant that external regulatory scrutiny was now firmly on Stratton's doorstep, adding a layer of urgency and gravity to the unfolding situation. The board's inquiry was methodical and thorough. They requested access to all relevant documentation, including my compiled dossier of emails, access logs, compliance reports, and financial audits. I cooperated fully, providing detailed explanations and clarifications as needed, always maintaining a professional and fact-focused demeanor. The investigation team, which included members of the Internal Audit Committee and outside legal counsel, began cross-referencing the evidence against the allegations. What became immediately clear was that the so-called anonymous tip was itself suspect, lacking credible substantiation and directly traceable to communications involving Martin Reynolds. Simultaneously, the SEC's Enforcement Division initiated a preliminary inquiry into the financial irregularities highlighted in the whistleblower report. The key issue was the unauthorized diversion of $350,000 earmarked specifically for IT infrastructure upgrades, funds that were redirected without board approval to projects within Martin's operational portfolio. This misallocation not only violated corporate governance policies, but also breached federal reporting obligations tied to Stratton's contracts with government agencies. The regulatory inquiry introduced the risk of significant penalties and mandated corrective actions, further pressuring Stratton's executive leadership to act decisively. Compounding the company's predicament were escalating concerns from key clients affected by the destabilized IT systems. Many contracts included stringent service level agreements, SLAs, with clearly defined performance and uptime metrics, as well as breach clauses that could trigger penalties, contract renegotiations, or even termination. Reports of intermittent service disruptions and security alerts had reached client oversight committees, generating formal inquiries. Recognizing the potential for cascading financial and reputational damage, the board prioritized addressing these contractual risks within the investigation framework. Throughout this period, I meticulously maintained all correspondence and documentation related to these developments. Every board request for information was fulfilled with precise indexed materials, accompanied by professional cover letters outlining the context and relevance of submitted documents. Internal communications confirmed that Martin remained unaware of the full extent of the investigations, continuing to operate under the assumption that his maneuver had succeeded. This disconnect only deepened his vulnerability, as his ongoing operational missteps and attempts to manage the fallout lacked strategic coordination. In parallel, Martin initiated multiple settlement overtures through informal channels, hoping to resolve the matter quietly. These included offers of reinstatement to my position under certain conditions and financial compensation packages intended to preempt formal legal action. I declined all such overtures, adhering strictly to legal counsel's advice to maintain a firm stance. My response was consistently professional and unambiguous. My lawyers will be in touch. This refusal underscored my commitment to holding Martin fully accountable rather than accepting a compromised resolution. Meanwhile, the Internal Compliance Department, led by Karen Blake, began reassessing their investigative procedures. As the board's formal investigation unfolded, the earlier procedural lapses and inaccuracies became apparent. Karen's team started to question the validity of their initial findings and the adequacy of their evidence-gathering methods. Their emerging skepticism aligned with the evidence I had presented, fostering an environment within compliance that was increasingly open to acknowledging the manipulation at play. This shift hinted at potential realignments in the internal power dynamics and suggested that future compliance actions might independently reinforce the case against Martin. From a strategic standpoint, I continued reinforcing technical safeguards within the IT environment. Recognizing that Martin's unauthorized operational decisions had compromised system stability, I prioritized isolating critical infrastructure elements and securing comprehensive backups. These actions not only protected Stratton's assets, but also ensured that any further unauthorized interventions could be detected and traced. This dual focus on legal and technical fortification was essential to maintaining credibility and control during the investigation's escalation. The convergence of these investigative and enforcement activities marked a turning point. The professional tide was shifting decisively. What began as a fabricated internal attack was transforming into a multifaceted corporate crisis, exposing deeper governance failures. At this stage, my role was not only to defend my reputation, but to leverage the documented evidence to drive systemic accountability. The board's formal investigation, the SEC's regulatory scrutiny, and the contractual pressures from clients created a powerful, interconnected framework that could no longer be ignored or sidestepped. While the situation remained volatile, I preserved an outward calm and continued to engage all parties with measured professionalism. Each interaction was carefully controlled, every communication documented, and all strategic moves aligned with legal guidance. This disciplined approach maintained my credibility and ensured that the unfolding narrative centered on facts and compliance, rather than emotion or speculation. The professional momentum was building toward exposing the full extent of Martin Reynolds's misconduct. The groundwork laid by meticulous documentation and strategic legal action was beginning to yield tangible institutional consequences. Yet, the complexity of the corporate environment and the high stakes involved dictated cautious progression. The next phases would require sustained vigilance, continued evidence collection, and precise engagement with all stakeholders as the investigation deepened and pressure mounted on those responsible. The culmination of the investigations and mounting evidence left Stratton Technologies with no viable option but to act decisively against Martin Reynolds. The formal board inquiry, backed by SEC scrutiny and internal audit findings, resulted in Martin's termination for cause. The reasons cited were extensive: breach of fiduciary duty, deliberate misappropriation of company funds, manipulation of compliance procedures, and gross negligence leading to operational instability. The termination documents were comprehensive, meticulously cross-referenced with the evidence we compiled: email correspondences, system logs, financial audits, and compliance reports, all irrefutably linking Martin to misconduct. This action wasn't merely a personnel change, it was a critical step toward corporate remediation. From a governance perspective, Stratton now faced multi-million-dollar penalties, both from regulatory bodies and contractual liabilities. The SEC's Enforcement Division levied fines exceeding $3 million due to the misallocation of funds and failure to meet reporting obligations related to federal contracts. These penalties were compounded by client claims resulting from service disruptions and breaches of service-level agreements, SLAs. Collectively, these client losses and contract damages surpassed $8.5 million, a figure that underscored the real-world impact of Martin's unauthorized operational decisions. The financial fallout threatened to destabilize not only Stratton's quarterly performance, but also its long-term viability in a competitive market. Martin's professional consequences extended beyond termination. His licenses and certifications relevant to operational management and corporate governance were suspended pending further investigation. This suspension was initiated by professional bodies overseeing operational compliance and ethical standards within the industry. These actions effectively blacklisted him from assuming any senior management roles within similar enterprises. The formal notices detailed the reasons for suspension, referencing the patterns of fraud and mismanagement uncovered during the investigations. This professional censure was a stark contrast to the overconfidence Martin exhibited at the outset of his scheme. Furthermore, internal revelations emerged as other employees, previously hesitant to speak out, came forward with accounts of nepotism and mismanagement under Martin's tenure. These testimonies painted a broader picture of a toxic culture, enabled by unchecked ambition and poorly enforced governance policies. Human Resources compiled these statements into supplementary reports, which were incorporated into ongoing corporate reform initiatives. This collective exposure catalyzed a cultural reckoning within Stratton, prompting new leadership to prioritize transparency, accountability, and meritocracy. Parallel to these professional upheavals, Martin's personal life also unraveled. Divorce proceedings surfaced, revealing documented misuse of company funds for personal expenses. Legal documents filed in family court included forensic accounting reports that traced unauthorized transfers and expense claims back to Martin. The asset division in the divorce incorporated these findings, with settlements favoring claims linked to the financial irregularities. This private fallout further eroded Martin's standing both within and outside the professional sphere. The cumulative legal fees and judgments against Martin personally surpassed $1.2 million. These costs encompassed penalties, restitution payments to the company, and legal expenses incurred during the multiple investigations and civil litigation processes. The financial burden was compounded by the suspension of his professional licenses, effectively curtailing his career prospects. The severity of these consequences sent a clear signal within the industry. Abuse of corporate trust and governance is met with systematic accountability. Throughout this period, I maintained a consistent and professional approach. Every action I took, from gathering evidence to engaging with legal counsel and communicating with stakeholders, was meticulously documented and executed within the bounds of corporate and regulatory frameworks. This approach not only fortified my position, but also reinforced my credibility with Stratton's leadership, regulatory agencies, and external observers. It was critical that my conduct remained beyond reproach, contrasting sharply with the flaws exposed in Martin's behavior. The unfolding scandal attracted attention across the industry. Publications specializing in corporate governance and IT management analyzed the case, highlighting the risks of nepotism and the importance of robust documentation and compliance. Stratton Technologies found itself under the microscope, prompted to implement sweeping reforms in governance, compliance oversight, and operational controls. These reforms included revising conflict of interest policies, strengthening whistleblower protections, and instituting more rigorous budgetary controls. My role in exposing these issues positioned me as a thought leader, invited to speak at industry forums and contribute to policy discussions. Within Stratton, the leadership transition following Martin's removal emphasized restoring stability and trust. New executives prioritized merit-based promotions and transparency initiatives, recognizing the damage caused by prior mismanagement. Internal audits became more frequent and comprehensive, compliance teams received enhanced training, and IT governance frameworks were overhauled. These initiatives underscored the tangible impact that one individual's misconduct had on an entire organization, and the professional resilience required to overcome it. As the dust settled on this phase, the professional destruction wrought upon Martin Reynolds was both profound and instructive. It underscored the essential nature of diligence, integrity, and systematic documentation in navigating and correcting corporate malfeasance. Yet, despite the severity of the consequences for Martin, the situation remained dynamic within Stratton and the wider professional community. The reforms and reputational shifts set the stage for ongoing vigilance and the potential for further revelations as the company rebuilt its foundation. At this juncture, my focus remained on maintaining the standards of professionalism that had guided me throughout. I continued to document all developments carefully and prepared for subsequent phases involving legal judgments, regulatory resolutions, and industry engagement. The unfolding narrative was far from concluded. It had merely entered a new chapter defined by accountability, recovery, and the reaffirmation of corporate integrity. The legal proceedings that followed the termination of Martin Reynolds marked a significant turning point in this protracted corporate conflict. Over several months, the court systematically reviewed the extensive documentation we had painstakingly assembled, from detailed access logs, contract clauses, and financial records, to the comprehensive chronology of events highlighting Martin's breach of fiduciary duties and procedural misconduct. The final rulings reflected not only the strength of the evidence, but the clarity of the professional case we presented. The courts awarded me $425,000 in damages, a figure encompassing severance pay, unpaid bonuses, and the full vesting value of my stock options, which had been unjustly withheld amid the initial investigation. This judgment was grounded firmly in the contractual protections embedded in my employment agreement, as well as in precedents established under corporate and labor law protecting employees from wrongful investigation and retaliation. The award validated the contractual safeguards I had relied on, and underscored the importance of thorough documentation in enforcing them. Simultaneously, Stratton Technologies faced regulatory penalties exceeding $3 million, imposed by federal oversight agencies. These fines arose from multiple violations exposed during our legal and regulatory inquiries, most notably the misappropriation of budgeted funds, failure to comply with required reporting standards under federal contracts, and lapses in internal controls that allowed unauthorized reallocations. The regulatory bodies emphasized that these breaches not only jeopardized government contracts, but also undermined public trust in Stratton's governance and compliance frameworks. The financial repercussions extended beyond fines. The cumulative client losses attributed to service disruptions and operational instability, directly linked to Martin's unauthorized changes, reached over $8.5 million. Several clients exercised breach of contract clauses in their agreements, resulting in cancellations or renegotiations under less favorable terms for Stratton. These contractual consequences reflected the tangible impact of the mismanagement, highlighting how operational failures can cascade into severe financial and reputational damage. Martin's professional standing deteriorated markedly in the aftermath. His corporate licenses and certifications, essential for maintaining senior operational roles in the industry, were suspended pending further investigations. These suspensions were initiated by the relevant professional regulatory bodies following evidence of fraud, negligence, and abuse of authority uncovered during the proceedings. The suspension effectively blacklisted him from taking on similar positions in major firms, significantly narrowing his career prospects. Meanwhile, internal revelations brought to light a broader pattern of nepotism and mismanagement within Stratton's management ranks during Martin's tenure. Several employees, previously reluctant to speak, submitted affidavits and testimonies corroborating systemic malpractices that had gone unreported due to a culture of fear and favoritism. Human Resources integrated these accounts into ongoing organizational audits, facilitating a comprehensive review aimed at cultural and procedural reform. This collective exposure catalyzed a corporate reckoning that extended beyond the immediate case. On the personal front, Martin's divorce proceedings became entangled with forensic financial analyses, revealing his misuse of company funds for personal expenses. Legal filings in family court meticulously documented unauthorized transfers and expense claims traced back to him. This evidence influenced the equitable division of assets, effectively channeling financial claims towards restitution linked to his corporate misdeeds. The intertwining of personal and professional fallout underscored the pervasive consequences of his misconduct. The aggregate of legal fees, penalties, and restitution orders against Martin personally surpassed $1.2 million. These costs encompassed damages awarded to Stratton, costs of civil litigation, and sanctions imposed through regulatory channels. The financial strain, coupled with the suspension of his professional credentials, created a near insurmountable barrier to rebuilding his career in corporate management or operations. Throughout these developments, I maintained an unwavering commitment to professionalism and strategic clarity. Every interaction with legal counsel, regulatory agencies, and company leadership was conducted with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring that my conduct remained beyond reproach. This discipline not only fortified my legal position, but also enhanced my standing in the eyes of industry peers and external observers, contrasting sharply with the failings exposed in Martin's approach. Industry response to the case was substantial. Corporate governance and IT management publications dissected the situation, emphasizing the critical need for rigorous documentation, transparent compliance practices, and mechanisms to guard against nepotism and internal corruption. The case became a reference point for best practices in protecting employees and organizations from similar abuses of power. Invitations to participate in expert panels and advisory boards followed, offering opportunities to contribute to shaping industry standards. Internally, Stratton Technologies embarked on a significant restructuring effort. New leadership prioritized merit-based advancement, transparency initiatives, and the strengthening of whistleblower protections. Compliance frameworks were overhauled to incorporate more rigorous audit procedures and enhanced training for investigative personnel. These reforms sought not only to rectify past vulnerabilities, but to establish a resilient governance culture that could withstand future challenges. The professional destruction of Martin Reynolds served as a potent illustration of how methodical documentation, contractual knowledge, and measured legal strategy can dismantle even well-placed attempts at corporate manipulation. While the consequences for Martin were severe and far-reaching, the broader impact of the case fortified industry understanding of the protective power held by thorough professional discipline and systematic accountability. As these judgments took effect, the case entered a new phase, one defined by recovery, reform, and reinforced professional integrity. The lessons learned underscored that in the complex corporate landscape, competence combined with strategic documentation and unwavering professionalism form the strongest bulwark against internal corruption and mismanagement. Now, as I reflect on the path forward, I find myself in a markedly different professional position, one forged through adversity but defined by renewed opportunity and reinforced credibility. Transitioning from my previous role at Stratton Technologies, I am now consulting independently, leveraging the deep expertise I developed over 15 years managing large-scale IT infrastructures. This shift has come with tangible benefits. My compensation package is approximately 30% higher than before, reflecting the premium placed on my proven ability to architect resilient systems and navigate complex corporate environments. More than salary, however, I have secured equity stakes in several promising startups that recognize the value of integrating robust IT governance and compliance frameworks from the outset. These equity positions not only diversify my professional portfolio, but also engage me in shaping innovative solutions that leverage emerging technologies, further expanding my industry influence. Maintaining a balanced work-life routine has been a deliberate priority throughout this transition. The intense scrutiny and protracted legal battles at Stratton underscored the necessity of sustainable professional practices. I have structured my consulting engagements to allow flexibility, ensuring that project demands align with personal and familial commitments. This equilibrium supports both high-level strategic thinking and detailed operational oversight without sacrificing well-being. Additionally, I have incorporated regular participation on industry advisory boards and professional forums. These roles enable me to contribute to policy development and knowledge-sharing initiatives, reinforcing my commitment to elevating standards across the IT and corporate governance sectors. In these capacities, I advocate for comprehensive documentation practices, transparent compliance protocols, and protections for employees facing internal investigations. The ordeal has deepened my appreciation for the power of thorough documentation and contractual understanding as foundational tools in professional resilience. Every email thread, system log, and contractual clause I had painstakingly assembled became critical assets in dismantling a fabricated investigation and exposing corrupt internal machinations. This experience underscored that competence alone is insufficient in corporate environments susceptible to power plays. Methodical record-keeping and strategic patience are essential defenses. I now emphasize these lessons in my consulting work, advising clients not only on technical infrastructure, but also on embedding accountability and procedural safeguards within organizational cultures. Moreover, the case validated the efficacy of measured, system-based responses over reactive or emotional reactions. Throughout the process, I deliberately maintained professional composure, ensuring that every communication and interaction reinforced my credibility. This posture was pivotal when engaging with legal counsel, compliance officers, and board members. It allowed me to navigate the complexities of internal investigations without compromising my standing or clouding the facts with personal feelings. I advocate this approach in my current advisory roles, emphasizing that strategic restraint can be as impactful as technical proficiency when confronting internal challenges. Reflecting on the broader implications, the Stratton episode reaffirmed the critical importance of contractual safeguards, such as confidentiality agreements, whistleblower protections, non-compete clauses, and severance terms. These provisions are not mere formalities, but vital instruments that protect employees' rights and professional viability. My experience demonstrated how these clauses, when understood and applied judiciously, create substantial leverage in corporate disputes. I now counsel clients extensively on negotiating and structuring such agreements proactively, mitigating risks before conflicts arise. Looking ahead, I remain committed to reinforcing integrity within corporate IT governance and compliance arenas. The reforms initiated at Stratton, rooted in lessons drawn from the challenges I faced, are emblematic of the positive change that systematic accountability can generate. My ongoing consulting projects and board engagements focus on embedding these principles into organizational DNA, ensuring that meritocracy prevails over nepotism and that rigorous documentation underpins operational decisions. This alignment not only protects companies from internal corruption, but also fosters environments where professionals can thrive based on competence and ethical conduct. In sum, this chapter of my professional journey highlights that justice in the corporate world is attainable, not through confrontation or impulsive reaction, but through meticulous preparation, unwavering professionalism, and strategic use of documented evidence. The experience has fortified my conviction that knowledge of contractual protections, combined with disciplined record-keeping, forms the backbone of career resilience. As I continue to advise and lead within the industry, I remain focused on translating these hard-earned insights into actionable frameworks that empower others to navigate and withstand complex power dynamics in their own organizations.